Fab. All right, welcome everyone. So, the University Challenge, our fun name. Hopefully, you enjoyed the Instagram. We just thought we'd do a very brief recap on who we are at WOX. So, six mentors, all women, aiming to share our knowledge, push and develop coxing, talk about coxing, create a community, educate around coxing. And the community bit is really, really important to us, making sure that we create conversations about an area of our sport, rowing, that we think is quite underdeveloped and more effort and energy should go into looking after and protecting our roles. So just a little bit of a background. Do keep a lookout. We've got a few things coming up in the next few months. So keep up to date. I'm sure you all do anyway, but keep up to date on social media. So that's just our brief intro / recap on who we are. And tonight we're going to hopefully help to open that thought process or conversation around what it's like in the terrible I guess it feels a bit like an escape room trying to apply to university, and you have to get through all of the hoops and all of the doors, and by the end you will hopefully receive a place at university. So we're just going to start a conversation about that, and on the next page hopefully we'll have a bit of what we're going to cover. So we're looking specifically at the US and UK universities. Hopefully there'll be some crossover with other universities, but this is where our area of knowledge, particularly associated with rowing, lies. So just a few things, the key differences that we've highlighted here, I'm sure you can all read, so I won't just read it to you. But I think the big differences lie in the fact that there is recruitment and then there are conversations. Recruitment being the ability to reach out, offer financial awards, and Morgan, please come in and correct me if I've got any of these phrases wrong, but athlete aid awards, and making sure that that there is funding available to athletes, including coxers. Whereas in the UK, it's slightly different. There's conversations that can be had, and I'm sure that we'll call it recruitment, but actually a lot of the universities in the UK rely on you getting in due to your own academic merit, and then we can have conversations about different pots of money you can apply to receive funding, but that's off your own back, as opposed to us having money to us being the UK universities having money to hand out to you in the rowing clubs. So Erin, please feel free to jump in on this.
I'm going to jump in.
Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. So we won't dwell too long on that previous screen because we're going to be kind of running through all of those things. If there's anything that you've kind of spotted there, maybe what's the difference, student athlete, scholar athlete, and all those sorts of things, we're going to be sort of running you through that in a little bit more depth rather than just kind of reading them out. So one of the kind of main things when you're kind of sitting back and thinking about university, this obviously applies to undergraduates, but also postgraduates as well. Obviously, there are some kind of slight differences. But if we talk about undergraduates first, because I know that a lot of the people who are joining live right now are particularly interested in undergrads. So there's a few things to consider when you're looking at a university. And we're thinking about this as you choosing somewhere that you would like to go and do a degree. And we're not just talking about kind of your rowing considerations. Obviously, that's something that is very relevant to what we're here to talk about, but that's why it's kind of at the bottom, because first, particularly with the UK university, the way that universities run is, first of all, it's course first. You're applying to study a specific course at university, and that needs to be one of kind of the main things you're starting to think about first. It might sound like super obvious, but there are so many different ways that essentially you can actually kind of study a course. And a great example is obviously, my own experience. For example, I did English, and you might think, oh yeah, okay, history and English, you could do that at any university. There's actually lots of specific universities that do, for example, English considered as English written in the English language in England. And that is what English is. That is what Oxford's course is. But for example, I had a friend who was at Royal Holloway who did completely different stuff, but it was still under the title of English. So being aware that you're applying for something that's specific, and obviously that is something that is different to a US university. You also have differences whether you're going England or Scotland, because in Scotland it's 4 years, and there is kind of a little bit more flexibility in their modules that you may be able to maybe do English, for example, but you might actually do a few modules in psychology, and all of those things can actually contribute towards your final degree. And also there's loads of different types of universities. The main ones basically fall into city, campus, or a very few of them are collegiate. City is basically does what it says in the tin. Think your kind of Manchester, a lot of your ones in London, and they are kind of city-based universities where there's lots of kind of different pockets of buildings around the city. So you'll probably spend a lot more time traveling between the kind of your accommodation, where you're having lectures and where you're staying. And then you have a campus university, which is sort of in my head like in the movies, where essentially almost everything is constructed. It's generally just outside a city, with great transport links often, or it might be somewhere quite remote. So knowing exactly what you're signing up for. For example, St Andrews is in the middle of nowhere. You have to get about 17 trains and a bus, which is fine if you're looking for something that's a little bit more rural, but making sure that you know sort of what you're looking for in those different types of universities. And the last one is collegiate, which is Oxford, Cambridge, and Durham primarily. In this kind of, and UL, yeah, that very kind of, no, you're right. That very kind of traditional kind of more collegiate. So you apply to a particular kind of college within that university. That's a whole nother can of worms. We are going to talk a little bit more specifically about Oxbridge and also rowing at Oxbridge, but we'll leave that to a later slide. So they're the kind of course considerations you do need to be thinking about, because you are actually thinking about applying for a degree as well as rowing. Then there's obviously the financial and administrative considerations that you have to do. You've got funding and how you're going to get funded. There is student finance. And then if you are an overseas student, and unfortunately now we are not in the EU, then you do have kind of greater fees if you're an overseas student. So that's something you need to be aware of. And then there are quite hard entry deadlines, which we'll go into a little bit more, but it's universal. That is the main thing that we want to get through to you guys. At UK universities, it is universal. And when you're thinking about rowing at a particular university, it doesn't really kind of matter if you're having conversations with the coaches. As an undergraduate, you need to be basically doing the university's structured way of applying, which is through UCAS. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a sec.
I think the other thing on the funding is that there are like as an undergrad, student finance as a UK citizen is going to be pretty much one of your best friends. And then on top of that, if you're rowing, there are many universities that will have pots of funding. Doesn't mean that they're just going to wave them about because we're British. It means that we try and keep them locked away. So they don't wave them in your face, but go and search. And so if you're looking to do rowing at a university and it's not a collegiate university, which we'll come on to in a second, but it's a campus university or a city university, look into the funding options that they have. And it will take a lot of Googling and it will take a lot of research. And that's where the escape room bit comes in. It's a real test. But it does exist. It's just a case of you putting yourself out there and applying to lots of different pots of money. And hopefully some of those will come off. And I think that definitely applies to both undergrad and even more so to postgrad. It is about lots of different pots of money that will help you fund that course. And I think that then when it comes on to collegiate, it's about applying to a college. So it's different where you go to. In Oxbridge, you apply to a course, and within that course, you are part of a school. So let's say it's the business school or the medical school, and then you alongside that, separately, you apply to your college, and your college, you then can apply to funding from there. It's very similar at University of London, and at Durham, it's slightly different, and you'll apply to both at the same time. So it's about making sure that you make the most of the opportunities that are presented to you, but a lot of it is research, research, research.
Yeah, absolutely. And if there's anyone out there who's thinking kind of, oh my goodness, I most likely could never afford university, student finance, it can be really tricky because you're looking ahead, and if it's something you're really passionate about and it's something you really want to do, it will be possible for you to go. And actually, student finance, despite the fact that, we're all talking about our student debt, all that sort of thing, it is genuinely the best deal on a loan you'll probably ever get in your whole entire life. And if it's something you really, really do want to do, particularly if you are kind of from a background that maybe you wouldn't think you would be eligible for student finance, you will be able to kind of get that loan, and actually you'll probably get more grants and you'll have more access to all those sorts of things. So if it's something you're really passionate about, this is something where actually hopefully your schools and counsellors will actually be in a really good place to advise you. And then obviously why we're here talking a little bit about these rowing considerations is thinking about, particularly when it comes to UK universities, generally speaking, there's less diversity, and we're going to let Morgan go wild on the US university side of things because that's very much her area of expertise. But when it comes from the rowing considerations, I think sitting down and thinking, almost when you're choosing a UK university, exactly the same, thinking about those rowing considerations, does it offer what you want in rowing? And we say that because obviously different rowing programs have different facilities. They've got different stretches they train on. They have different basically funding levels in terms of how many coaches do they have? Do they have a really thriving men's squad, women's squad? Do they specialize in sculling like Reading? Or are they really big on sending boats to Bucks? Do you have GB rowing aspirations? If so, kind of, is there a club with a proven history of kind of supporting athletes with those kind of higher aspirations? All those sorts of things is really important for you to know where you are in your rowing journey and what you might want to do. And obviously, if you're a Cox, you're probably online and not really thinking about Reading, for example, and you might be a bit sad if you turn up and there's nothing to jump in a boat for. So thinking about all of those sorts of things. And then there's this idea of kind of this eligibility as well, and making sure that you are eligible to row in the program that essentially is being offered there. The last thing as well is this idea of a scholar athlete, and Morgan's going to talk a little bit more about the difference between the American system and how that is a little bit different. But the reason we've kind of termed it a scholar athlete is because the way it's sort of considered with a UK university is you are a scholar first and an athlete second. You are at the university to do a degree. You've applied to the university, whether it's postgrad or undergrad, and the expectation is that you do that degree and then you put that first, and you are able to be an athlete around that. And don't get me wrong, I think at times during my degree, I definitely did a lot of rowing over degree at times, but actually kind of the priority is that kind of scholar side of things. The university is letting you in because you are a scholar, not because you're an athlete, which leads me perfectly on to your personal statement, which is probably the question that we get a lot around universities. And it's something that I've worked for a number of years in helping students with their applications to university. And a big question is always, how much should I be putting in my personal statement about rowing? Or if you're looking at postgrad, you'll generally be looking at something which is called a statement of interest. If we're thinking postgrad and statement of interest, I would say, generally speaking, it's not about the rowing at all. It's very much about what your research project is going to be. So I would actually advise keeping the rowing down to an absolute minimum, unless you're basically saying what a well-rounded person you are and you have more interests. But if I'm honest, the people who
or
are
you're
giving
studying rowing,
you
biomechanics of rowing or something,
yeah, or like female athlete health, then it's totally
yeah.
then you're embedded in the sport. But other than that, keep the rowing out of it.
Yeah.
And then when it comes to personal statements are one of the most important parts of a UK university application, specifically for those universities that don't interview, which is the majority. Unless you're applying for some medical sciences, whether that is medicine or veterinary or some sort of more vocational subjects where you may have an in-person interview, or you're looking at Oxbridge, it is basically the one sort of non-binary presentation of yourself that they are getting to read. Now, this is where that scholar athlete is really important, because actually, remember who's reading your application. You are applying to the university to study a subject, and whilst they will be interested in you as a person and the things you do outside, the primary thing that they're interested in is your academics and what you have done, why you want to study that subject, not that you won Henley, which is really cool. I've never won Henley, but I wouldn't be leading with that in my personal statement. So personal statement is academic first. I think having something in about your rowing is really useful, just to say you're really good at time management, that you're really diligent, you're really dedicated, you're a hard worker, all of the really transferable skills that you have from coxing and rowing. Put it in the personal statement, but it shouldn't be taking up more than, I'd say, a sixth of what you're actually basically talking about.
And I think please feel free to share all of your interest in your rowing with the coaches at the university. Feel free, particularly in the UK, like reach out to coaches that are running the program, ask them what the program's like, find out all of this stuff that Erin's just talked about, in terms of like, does it offer what you want? What are the goals? What are their aims? What does that club, like, what's their ethos, like how do they operate, and does it fit with your character and what you want to get out of it? And so that is always available. All coaches will be happy to have a chat, and I would definitely recommend it if you're trying to it's quite a big decision to make, and it's probably the first very big decision you make as a young person, if it's your undergrad, and it'll be one of your second big decisions when you go to do your postgrad. So like, it's important to think about making sure they fit, like the university and the program fits you as much as you fit them.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not going to dwell too much on this, because this is not specific kind of to coxing and rowing and WOX, but for anyone who's joining who is not kind of British and maybe have had this through their school, UCAS is essentially this central system, if you are an undergraduate, through which you must make your application. The big highlights are essentially that if you are applying to Oxford, Cambridge, and for most of those medical ones I mentioned already, medicine, dentistry, veterinary science, the deadline is the 15th of October, the year before entry. If you are thinking about other universities, the deadline is the end of January. That doesn't mean that you can't submit your application early, and I would advise doing that if you can, because it means that you can already start getting offers before Christmas. They don't wait for all the offers to come in. It is often done in most universities on a rolling basis. And so if you have any kind of queries and questions, UCAS actually have some really good videos to help you kind of get to know what the system looks like. And we've screenshotted here it particularly. There's a lot of financial information and support available for international students. But hopefully a lot of you are being supported in your school. But it is important just to acknowledge that essentially UK universities, undergraduate, UCAS is the only way forward. Just to wrap up this little bit about UK universities, the kind of outlier and obviously the kind of more famous university programs is Oxford and Cambridge. So I'm going to let Tilda and I chip in on this one, because I'm obviously coming at it from a undergraduate perspective, and then obviously Tilda is coaching at the University of Cambridge at the moment. So we have kind of some key things here just to think about.
I think the reason that we've put this up is that, as Erin said, it is the outlier. Like it is quite different in lots of ways in the application process and what you're going to do. Like the boat race is different to every other type of goal that universities tend to have. So we will at Oxford and Cambridge, the aims may still be GB trials, they may still be Henley, but the main aim is the boat race. And so it just slightly shifts when you're looking at whether it fits you or whether you fit it as a program. That's probably the biggest thing that I would say is the outlier. Erin already mentioned the 15th of October deadline is a really big one in terms of undergraduates. And this kind of goes along with thinking early. Our admin, wonderful admin woman always says, you need to be thinking about Oxbridge 2 years before you apply. That's her advice. And inevitably, with postgraduates, we'll have people thinking about it now, and the funding deadlines have closed already for postgraduates, and that's beginning of December and then beginning of January. There are two, and it's about making sure that you're thinking long term ahead of making sure actually these kind of all going quite nicely, but most years within your degree count. So if you are applying to Oxbridge as a postgrad, everything you will have done will be looked at. So if you flunked one of your modules, it's important that you sort of have a look at how that's affected your cumulative score, whether that be GPA, as mentioned, or whether that be like your grade as in a 2-1 or a first or whatever. It depends on where you are coming from. And then the only other thing I would say on that is as a undergrad, and Erin, please chip in here if I've got this horribly wrong, but they will look at your GCSEs as well as your A levels. So it will not just be your A levels or your IB, it will be what you did prior to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And the GCSEs that you've taken will impact potentially kind of the courses that you are more naturally going to be applying for. When it comes to Oxford and Cambridge, they're very strict on it's the academic merit fair. This is the scholar 5 times underlined athlete, as a lot of my academic directors told me during my degree. But I think it's just really important just to consider, particularly as an undergraduate, but also as a postgrad as well. The application is long and multifaceted. We're thinking about obviously the things you've already done, but you can expect particularly as an undergrad, the majority of you will do some sort of aptitude tests. If you've made that October 15th deadline, towards the end of that month or the start of the next, depending on your subject, you often have to do an aptitude test, which you need to basically kind of be entered for. Then you will have interviews at the beginning of December with results literally coming out, I think almost this week. We're getting undergraduate offers coming through. Be prepared for multiple stages, and just being aware that there are different funding sources, but the undergrad postgrad thing sort of applies here. When we were talking about kind of there's little pockets and pots of money. Obviously, if you are a postgrad and you're looking for funding for a PhD, that's obviously a completely different kettle of fish. Yeah. And then there's one also thing just to mention as well with collegiate versus university rowing. It's important to know that essentially there's sort of two different things. So I started at college level. So I rowed for my college in Oxford. I rowed for Pembroke College. And then I trialed for the university team. So it's a little bit different. Whereas if you were at Brookes or Newcastle, you are just rowing for Newcastle University. So it's just something to be aware of. If you are, an experienced athlete kind of coming in, then absolutely, I would encourage you to reach out to those kind of Oxford or Cambridge kind of boat clubs and talk to them about kind of trialing, because they're always interested to hear from people who've had experience. But like myself, if you, I was completely experienced when I first started Oxford, but I still ended up going to do a boat race. So you can come through the college system as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the only other thing I'd mention on that is if you are interested in Oxbridge colleges and rowing for your college, even if you're looking at rowing for the university, do look up bumps, 1 for a laugh and 2 for some understanding of what you might be about to enter, which is pretty awesome. Yeah.
Just before we move on to US, we just had a question in the chat about if you took your GCSEs early. So that is probably going to be kind of looked positively in your favor because, obviously they will have seen that you would probably be very capable at school and you're in a position to be able to do that. It's not going to be necessarily the be all and end all when it comes to Oxbridge and undergraduate studies, but it's only going to kind of be positive. One thing I would say, if you're choosing A levels, if you're joining us and you're a little bit younger, be aware that if you were, let's say, you're doing 4 A levels, they may well give you an offer that requires grades in those 4 A levels rather than just the 3. So for example, I did 4 A levels and I got an offer. I originally applied to Cambridge, and they did warn me that I may get an offer with 4 different grades. I didn't get into Cambridge, but I went to Oxford and that was fine. Right, we're going to hand over to Morgan because she is the expert in US schools.
Okay, well, thank you very much, guys. That's been a very detailed, but a bit of a whistle-stop tour at the same time of the UK university process. So we're going to talk a little bit about US now. My experience is more specifically within the NCAA, which is the women's open weight side of US-based rowing and attendance to university. But the IRA, which is the Intercollegiate Rowing Association, that is the men's open weight side. It also covers men's and women's lightweight. So there are 2 different championships or boards in which that you operate under and that offer the governance and the rules around being a student athlete at a particular US institution. I think the first thing to understand and really have at the forefront of your mind is you need to do the best you can at school, regardless of whether you're applying to UK or US. So having that confidence and the solid founding in your academics from your schooling is really, really critical for the process. And there are a series of rules in the NCAA. It is quite strict with the rules that apply. That's to ensure fairness in competition and also to protect the student athlete. And the rules are similar but different again from the IRA. They follow a different set of rules. And the rules can also vary from institution to institution, so from university to university. So what we're going to go through is basically the way I would recommend you gathering your information, starting to understand the prospects of going to a US university. And then the last thing before we change slides is isn't often or it's not regularly done that Coxes get scholarships to these programs, but it's not necessarily unheard of. It is possible to do so. That's at the discretion of the recruiting team and the head coach. If you're somebody who they deem is outstanding, they're going to offer you one of those positions. You can receive a slot, so there's X amount of positions they can have on their roster for the rowing teams. And it might just be a non-scholarship based position. So there is ways to attend the university that are outside the remit of receiving full funding or partial funding. And you can also apply to a university on your own if it's something that you are a dual national or you meet one of the criteria that allows you to do that. So there are different ways in which you can do it. The more common route is through the scholarship route, and the process is kind of as follows as we change the slides. So the first thing is we want to make sure we establish communication, and that's pretty simply, we'll do that through recruitment questionnaires. So if you think of any American university name that you know or any program that you think, yep, that's cool, I want to consider that, and you go on Google and you search Yale University Men's Rowing Recruitment Questionnaire, that questionnaire will come up and you want to fill that in. And then what happens is that someone at that program, one of the coaches, will have your contact details. They'll know your age, they'll know your height, they'll know whether you're a Cox, whether you're a rower, ergo scores, any information that they require to get a bit more understanding, they will have that on their recruitment questionnaire. The next thing is to make sure that you understand the university rankings in both rowing and academically. And this is because you want to know where you're applying, how their performance is, just in the same way as you do with a UK institution. You can check the IRA or the NCAA website, and it's going to give you different sections on being a student athlete and a bit more explanation about your rules. You're entitled to an official visit per each institution, so each university, and an official visit usually means that they pay for that visit for you. An unofficial visit is where they don't pay for it. So you can have an unlimited number of unofficial visits to a program, but you would have to pay for that yourself. And then the last little bit is about kind of dead periods or non-contact periods. And that's when it's impermissible. So it's not allowed for coaches from these universities to contact you. And we'll explain a little bit more about that on the next slide. The athlete clock, I'll come to that later. So a bit of a timeline for you. Now, this varies again between the IRA and the NCAA. The best way for you to find out what the actual timeline is going to start from being in either year 10 or year 11, and you want to fill in your recruitment questionnaires. My recommendation is fill in as many as you can to any program that you think you might be interested in. And what happens is you'll fill in that questionnaire, and when it is the appropriate time, depending on your age or where you are in your schooling years, a coach will reach out to you or should reach out to you. So you can contact a coach at any time, but until the June 15th of your year 11 year, and I think it's possibly the 1st of September for the IRAs, but it does vary, so don't quote me on that. But until a certain deadline, until June 15th of your year 11, a coach cannot contact you back. It's not allowed. That would be a rule violation. Once we've reached that date, coaches can come into contact with you, and what might happen is they might have a pre-scheduled email, and it's going to come flying into your email box on that day. The important thing is that once they've contacted you, you establish and continue to build rapport in that communication. And that's where you're going to learn more about the program, where you can ask the questions. You probably hop on a FaceTime or a Zoom call. You might ask them about their results, what their team ethos is, how's the culture, what their views are on international representation, what's the representation been like at the Olympic Games. Any questions you have, this is your information gathering opportunity, and it's a chance for you to meet and talk to one of the coaching staff. Usually after this, you start to get to the remit of either considering or talking about unofficial or official visits. And then after an official visit or an unofficial visit, the slot offering, so the position on a program, comes through in a verbal commitment. So a coach may offer you a slot on their roster, and each team has a different amount of slots available to the team. And if they offer you one, this will be verbally, and you can verbally accept it. And that is at the kind of the discretion or the time window permitted from the coach that's given you that offer themselves. Come November of your final school year, so that is year 13 usually. It could be after a gap year, those are permitted. You will get a letter of commitment of sorts that is given to you. So PSA means potential student athlete. And this is some form of document in which you can sign that commits you to an institution, or is an agreement that you're going to go to that university as an athlete. That's not your application to the university. This used to be a national letter of intent. That's now gone in the NCAA. That's no longer a thing. So it's something slightly different now. And again, that's for communicating with your coaches of the program that you're talking to. Next slide, please. So dead periods or shutdowns, this is when coaches cannot talk to you. Within the NCAA, coaches would get a violation, a bit of a telling off if they broke this rule and contacted you during these periods. It's not necessarily something for you to worry about because nothing's going to come against you. And there are dead periods or kind of shutdown and comms periods in the IRA as well. So these periods exist. But what's great is, just like with this lovely little Iowa Rowing University post here, they tend to communicate this with you. So you know when there's going to be a shutdown period and they're not just ghosting you. Okay, next slide, please. this is some examples of what a recruitment questionnaire could look like. And it could be anything from a big picture that you've got with UVA followed by the questions, or it might just be a very simple heading and it goes straight into the questions for Cal Berkeley and their men's rowing team. Again, fill these in. Fill in as many as you can, because the more you fill in, the more chances of building rapport or contact you're going to have with different institutions. Be transparent. So you're going to want to have prepared your own performance CV. They want to know what you've done, when you did it, how you did. Do you need a scholarship? If it's to the Ivy League, so the Ivies are private institutions rather than state-funded institutions, and they don't necessarily have scholarships, but they have need-based or needs-tested aid that can support you in your funding or finances. Think about whether you're taking a gap year. Have you already taken one? Are you on one? Are you considering one? Are you applying undergrad or postgrad? I'll tie this in a minute to your athlete clock. Think about what you value. So you're even though you can feel like you're going somewhere based on rowing, you're going to get a degree. So we want to be hot on that and ask those questions. Be consistent. You want to have regular calls, text updates, let them know how you're getting on. You're trying to build rapport, and just speak to athletes that are on the team to get a better feel of what it's actually like there. So athlete clock. An NCAA rule is that you've basically got a 5-year window to complete 4 seasons of competition. You can have up to 2 gap years, and there's different rules that influence this. And it's a similar sort of ruling within the IRA. Again, the best thing is to speak with the coaches or your recruiter, and they will explain how you fit within that institution and their ruling.
So just a lovely quick recap on the things we've covered. Remember, it is a degree alongside rowing, not just rowing. So yeah, whistle-stop tour of applying to university in the UK and the US. Morgan, you did a sterling job there. Well, wonderful work. And thank you so much for joining us. I popped a message in the chat. Please do email us with any questions you have, and look forward to seeing you all soon.